Capitalism, Nature, Socialism, and the new journal, Capital as Power. She currently works on African political economy, climate change, fossil fuel extraction issues, gendered social movements, and global transition from a hydrocarbon civilization to a solar commoning civilization. Terisa teaches in the Sociology and Anthropology Department at the University of Guelph. So I'd like to welcome Terisa to give her presentation.
Thank you. I hope you're as enthusiastic when I finish. It's a real honor to be here. I think it's the 4th time I've been invited to speak at a Parkland conference. I want to launch a provisional, tentative draft Revolutionary Ecofeminist Manifesto for the 21st Century. And this is presented in 3 parts. One, I review very briefly some of the efforts to keep fossil fuels in the ground. Secondly, I look at what I call the theory of ethicized, gendered class analysis. And lastly, I consider 2 cases that indicate to me how we can actually make a transition from the current for-profit, commodity, capitalist, fossil fuel global system to an alternative, commoning, collective, solar-based epoch, a whole different civilization. So we are facing ecocide, and we have to keep fossil fuels and uranium in the ground in order to avoid that ecocide. Also, we have to protect the forests. This does focus the mind on efforts, direct efforts, to keep fossil fuels in the ground. And I'm sure that many of us have heard the 4-part poem, if you will, keep the gas under the grass, keep the coal in the hole, keep the tar sand in the land, and keep the oil under the soil. So let's look at some instances of efforts to do so. And they are interesting in part for their gendered nature, whereby usually women at the very bottom of this hierarchy of labor power, thank you for mentioning the hierarchy of labor power, which can be considered on a global scale, the initiatives of women joined by men in an alliance to take action to keep fossil fuels in the ground. We have the very important case of the almost 1 billion barrels of oil in the Ecuadorian Amazon in the Yasuni area, which from 1997 have been slated to stay in the ground if about half the dollar value can be raised internationally. Anyone here can make a contribution to keep that oil underground. We have the case of Costa Rica, which I worked on for years, whereby in April of 2002, the Costa Rican government, the new government, won its election because it had as its main plank a commitment to not allow any oil exploration production in Costa Rica or in the offshore Pacific or Atlantic shores and waters. We have efforts to keep the tar sands in the land. We have the efforts of the Walpole Island First Nations women, the Akikwe water defenders, just south of Sarnia, to stop, a successful effort to stop 350,000 barrel a day Shell refinery expansion. And the women did that in a remarkable way. In one of the mandated community Shell meetings, they requested that there would be no paper, and they brought their children who had been born with birth defects. 1 in 10 of their pregnancies either end or prematurely or produce children with birth defects. And so we had this whole evening of women talking about, sometimes their children talking about, the endocrine disruption that the oil industries have imposed on that community, whereby out of every 3 children that are born, 2 are female and 1 is male. And Shell dropped that refinery expansion like a hot potato immediately. This was in 2008. So we have a lot of efforts to keep oil in the ground. What about gas? We have the anti-fracking initiatives in New York State, in France, in Quebec, where over 700 community groups, largely led by women, were the foundation, the roots of the Quebec so-called Maple Revolution, the uprising in Quebec, which is ongoing. With regard to coal, we have many, many instances around the world of keeping coal in the hole. The climate caps in the UK were very much led by women. They were ecofeminist initiatives. Their efforts in South Africa to end coal mining. There was the railroad blockage of the huge coal project for export to China in Mozambique this January. And then, of course, there are so many initiatives to stop uranium production for nuclear and to discontinue this nuclear renaissance, so-called, especially after Fukushima. Now, I want to go to the second part of what I want to talk about, which is it's about theory, it's about a theoretical framework, it's a little bit demanding. It might be of particular interest to people who want to place some of their knowledge and their experiences in a global and historical framework that's geared towards an actual transition from a capitalist fossil fuel epoch, a whole civilization, to a solar civilization based on harmony, prioritizing life, not profit. It has 5 elements or 5 dimensions. The first one is the hierarchy of labor power, where you have a class line, maybe exploiters or 800 billionaires,